The title of this session, the Countering Russian Influence Operation, Regional and Global Perspectives. And we have two distinguished speakers with us. And our first speaker is Agnieszka Legucka. The title of her presentation, Countering Russian Information and Influence Operations, Poland versus Baltic States. Her areas of expertise include Russian foreign and international policy, security issues and conflicts in the Eastern neighborhood, EU-Russia and NATO-Russia relations, Russian disinformation and hybrid threats. Agnieszka is an associate professor in the Faculty of Finance and International Relations, Vistula Academy of Finance and Business. Agnieszka is also a deputy editor-in-chief of the Sprawy Międzynarodowe magazine and a Team Europe expert. Agnieszka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Today we've heard a lot of very inspiring presentations. Most of it are connected with measuring, monitoring, fact-checking, and what Russia is doing, how we can observe that, how we can understand that, analyze, and take all the outcomes from it. Let me challenge you by my presentation to talk about different side of the coin. Because from my perspective, I was researching that issue, and I'm also in several projects which are working on FIMI. I will just explain what it is. We are aware that only one side of the coin is what you are doing. I mean, most of you, and today we've heard, are doing fact-checking, looking closely what kind of Russia, but not only Russia, but China and others actors are doing when it comes to disturbance our informational sphere. But other coin is much harder to do. And looking from inside, I can tell you that there are lots of efforts to not only counter act to Russia, Chinese and others misinformation, disinformation, but how to manage to the strategic communication, which is the most difficult part of the coin. And you cannot work without this second part. It's like when someone is lying and there is a story that the lie goes very fast and the truth is just very slow, right? And it's true, because afterwards, if you read that fact-checkers made or somehow said that this is not true, actually no one bothers, because everyone knows the truth, which is not, right? Which is exactly the false things. And I was also, by researching the idea or countermeasure or somehow manage the strategic communication and elaborating the disinformation messages and how they operate, I come up all the time with the psychological thinking, how our brain is working, how we are affected by bias theory, how we believe in fake news and why we believe in fake news. Researchers are provided the data that we are not following by the truth. The truth is not important for human beings. Actually, emotions connected with the messages are more important than the truth itself, the facts. This is the reality, and the social media are what we have heard are very important to spread news, fake news, disinformation news, misinformation news, by fueling with the emotions, and that drivers are very, very influential. The last thing, as an introduction, when I have my lectures with my students, we sometimes draw the line, that you have the line on which, on one side, you have people who believe in everything, on spice theory, 5G theories, and etc., all the things, all the boxes with the whole different things you have. On the other side, you can have people who do not believe in anything. And actually, it's not the line, it's the circle. Those people like connecting psychologically in the same place. Either you believe in everything, either you do not believe in anything. And what this Russia is doing, Russia is not saying that this is true and this is not true. Actually, they building or undermining our trust to any news. And this is the key. If everyone lies, Americans, Europeans, and journalists, and researchers, and academics, then they can spread everything. And we are much more vulnerable to that kind of relative thinking. And you probably know Russian language very well if you were researching it. The main message I get from any interviews, from the ordinary people, they say, "Не всё так однозначно." It means that everything is not reliable, right? So they don't know the truth. We are not able to go to the truth. So if you are not able to touch the truth, then everything is happening and you are not have a power to do so. So you are passive. You are like taking your side from everything which is around you. So that's why one of the elements I think that Russians are so reluctant to what is going on, because others will decide. The Kremlin will decide what to do because they know better. We don't know, we are not sure, right? And this is the thing that Russia is trying to do in our democratic societies, that we will not believe in anything, in the government institution, and etc. So the key things is like that kind of a conference. I really enjoy that. And exactly gaining the trust again. I will talk about FIMI. I don't know if you know this term. Some of you probably yes, some don't. It is a very important term. It's the acronym of the Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. Since, the European Union, I joined MFA from the Polish presidency. Now we have presidency for half year in the European Union. I'm very proud of it. But in the European Union, we were struggling with the disinformation, how to counteract with Russian disinformation, etc. And since 2022, researchers, people who are engaged in that field decided that disinformation is not this whole picture. There's much more of it. And much more of it what Russia and others are doing in the European Union, but on a global scale, is exactly foreign information manipulation, because sometimes it's not only fake news. In how you manipulate with the truth, how you give the messages to the audience, and how you can distract from the real what is happening, giving the Matryoshka case, right? There can be a truth inside the small doll, but they are taking back all the things around, and it's very difficult to distinguish what percentages is exactly disinformation and what is only interpretation that mislead others, right? So foreign information manipulation, and the last and the most important, and interference. When we talk and we describe what is actually Russia is doing in the European Union, is more than disinformation. And if you remember the Cold War struggle, you probably have heard about active measures, right? So FIMI is something, not the same thing, but there's something comparable to the active measures, how we approach to the issue. Espionage, the cyber attacks that we are talking about it today, disinformation, of course, and attacking the critical infrastructure, everything what disturbs our political, social life in our democracies. And what is very important, it's not only manipulation of the information, but exactly the interference. This interference is very difficult to distinguish, it's difficult to define. However, we understand that in our very different societies, in every, I think, European and American, Canadian societies, we have very polarized societies, right? So acting to fight with the FIMI is not about censorship. It's actually protecting this external interference to our political life. We can struggle with our political parties, different opinions, critics, and etc. But if there is an external interference, it's something we need to stop. And this is something that democracies need to protect the political sphere, political democracies in our world, because we believe in that and we need to protect that. I will talk about comparison of Poland and 3 Baltic states, but I will not go very deeply into the measures that they take. This is kind of a, for me, element to discuss more than general question how we can counteract FIMI, how we can actually make this strategy communication working. As you probably know, we are neighbors to Russia as Ukraine, but not so experienced with the aggressive actions from this country, but we have historical memory of that Russia is imperialistic, is a colonial, and is the country which is all the time trying to expand, because on the other side it thinks that it will collapse. So Russia is expanding because it's so afraid that it will collapse on the other side. And Poland and Baltic states, and it's kind of a general overview that Russia will not spread very positive emotions to Russia because they will not work, just simple. But at the same time, Russia is using everything what is connected with anti. So we can name anti-European messages, anti-Americanism messages, vaccine messages, and that was very important for me to observe that those accounts on Twitter, before now X, that were like spreading anti-vaccine messages, that they are anti-freedom and etc., on day of Russian invasion, they switched to the anti-Ukrainian messages. And you could like see it on the graph that, oh my God, what is happening here, right? So one of the elements is, of course, anti-Ukrainian messages, which works, unfortunately, quite well in the Polish society. We have issues, political and historical issues as well as neighbors. Those emotions are very there. And unfortunately, also opinion polls are showing that that kind of messages are quite effective. One of the messages I remember from the beginning of the war, that Ukrainian women are coming to Poland to steal our husbands. And you know, the one of the group which is the most skeptical towards Ukrainians, when you can like divide too many Polish society, it's exactly young women. And my colleagues are an expert. They are saying, oh, it's because they want us. No, it's like a matrimonial rivalry. But it's not. Actually, it is the group that is more affected to not only disinformation, but also the contact people to people. And sometimes there is a competition to schools, to medical services, and etc. So taking all the, thinking about the disinformation, there are groups to which about the strategy communication, we need to think about and somehow give them another message that only they receive from the social media, for example. We have common understanding that Russia is a threat and common activities from the Russian side. Comparing Poland to Baltic states, we do not have Russian speakers, so many. And actually, it's not the political issue. They are not those who are trying to undermine our democracies. However, I would say that we have other problems, other groups which are sympathizing with not Russia particularly, but with anti-messages and anti-globalist, anti-establishment, and Russia is working exactly on that kind of groups. I already told you, and it's kind of obvious thing, that Russia is trying to erode our institutions, democratic institutions, and it's working because sometimes when we read about fake news, I don't like this word, but the false messages, sometimes I come up with the message, with the slogan that it's not new, right? It was every time in our history there were false and good messages. What happened now, it is nothing different. Actually, also research shows that one of the elements which decrease according to use of social media and disinformation and everything which is connected with FIMI, is exactly affecting trust to democratic institutions. And this is the key point why we need to also overcome that kind of process. When I will compare Baltic states and Polish attitude, how we can react on FIMI, is exactly very comparable. We have an understanding that actually this is psychological warfare or psychological operations. That's why we need to counteract with the strategic communication. Strategic communication is very difficult to manage. I will tell you from my experience. We did a group in Polish Foreign Affairs that back then I was an expert of Polish Institute of International Affairs, but we had a group of people who were from different sides of the government, but also non-governmental organizations, which was like media, intelligence, the election commission, because we were just ahead of the parliamentary elections in the European Union. And what affected me the most from that experience, we were actually knowing what is going on. We could monitor freely. I mean, we saw what was going on. But from our perspective, it was very difficult. Okay, if we know what we see, if we can elaborate it, we have a numerous wonderful publication on this information. We have a numerous researchers like you who are actually showing us the problem. But it was very difficult for us to manage what kind of message we should go to our electorate. And that was a division of that public administration is having, that, okay, let's consultate between ministry how we should message on that particular issue. Because on many things, we actually know what kind of messages Russia will impose to us, right? They are working like a machine which is repeating all this time the same stories. And I can draw you that they have like meta-narratives, narratives and messages. And from 2014, they are all the time repeating the same story. And they're not the first who said that if you repeat the lie the 100 times, it becomes a truth, right? But it's working all the time, repeating the same thing. So my question was always like, okay, if we know what we see, if we know all the infrastructure, the presentation, the previous presentation that we have from Telegram, from other places, so how come we are not doing enough to counteract that, to actually learn from our adversaries, which means we need to divide, and it was said today, we need to define or differentiate our messages to particular group of people, like women in Poland, for example, young women in Poland, and other groups, to work not only with the global message that it's Kremlin fault, they did very wrong, but actually how to work with each group separately with the, direct messages, with the not only truth. In our understanding, we also need to take on board psychologists to build the message which will be not only truth, because we already said that it's not the most important, how to build the truth information with the emotions that will affect other people. And the same thing, Estonia is having the national security policies, and the Baltic states are very good example of good practices, because they are small and they have small capacity to react. Why? The government usually complains that they don't have money, they don't have resources, and etc. Actually, Baltic states are showing an opposite. The small capacity, the smaller group of people who are counteracting Russian activities, the FIMI, it's better. I know, maybe not in Estonia, but in Lithuania, which is also concentrating attention not how to elaborate Russian disinformation, which is already there, and already we've heard about the bank, which is the non-governmental organization, which is very good and active in that arena, in the strategy communication. But the most important is how to communicate in the group of people who are actually quite active and influential in that. So they have a group of people on Signal connected with the very high position officials, and they are, sharing like all the time information if something is happening. Now we did the same in Poland, that to be connected, that have small network of governmental officials on many different spheres to, check us. Do you see the same thing there? Yes. Do you think that it's true, what they are doing there? Okay, let's share it between us and react. It's also something which maybe here is not elaborated very freely, but European Union forced us to do so. In 2019, they created Rapid Alert System, which is something like a Facebook for those who are working on disinformation. So if something is happening in France, they are posting it to the special website, which is in the network. They are asking others, do you see the same things? Like the farmer protests, and we were watching at it, not as in particular country, but in the whole European Union. But what I would like to stress on and show you how they are wisely using the institutions on one hand, but also bottom-up approach. And you have different types of how the institutional hubs, how they are operating in different governments. So for example, and usually when you have problem in the democracy, you create an institution, which is not always working. But the different countries have different models to tackle with the FIMI. For example, in France, they have centralized institution, which is Viginum. In Poland, the most important group of people and the institution is inside MFA, but there are other models. The best models are always showing that the Sweden and Finland has best practices for that, how to operate on that. But in Lithuania, they have a special unit, which is very highly connected and very well connected with other governmental and non-governmental institutions. Why I'm showing this chart? Because they gave a scale how to react and when to react. So if there is from 0 to 2, it's not very important messages what is spreading in social media or something. So and then they go to 10. In 10 position, they need to alert Prime Minister, because Prime Minister, from his position, he can devote others' work to do to the ministers. From my perspective as an analyst, not as an employee of MFA, I think MFA is not the highest, from my personal overview, the best place. It is very good, but the best is exactly the more connected with the Prime Minister. So maybe you can elaborate it to other countries. And also comparing Poland and the Baltic states and some kind of matching the European Union approach from maybe Western democracies, that in Baltic states they have more offensive approach than us. So we do elaborate, we do monitor, we do see the problem. It is very difficult to come up with the strategy communication, what to say. But Baltics are saying, okay, we can say what we want, but actually we need to disturb, and Ukrainians are doing that very well, perfectly, I would say, to work and disturb Russian information cyber sphere. So a number of things which are not yet working out with the other European Union countries. Still, we are kind of limiting ourselves to do more, to be much more offensive, much more active in that regard. When it comes to Poland, just to come up with the solutions from 2019, because of the European Union ideas and the circumstances, there was 3 people in MFA who are working on actually disinformation messages connected with the foreign policy. Now we have almost 30, because we realize that 3 people is quite not enough number of those who need to not only monitor, but also to counteract that kind of actions. So we came up with these solutions that we have a special department of the strategy communication fighting with the foreign disinformation. But at the same time, we are proposing during our Polish presidency something which is called Resilience Council. And I think that kind of thing can be spread all over. We are trying to give this model to our European countries on the European level. And what is the Resilience Council? It exactly goes to the approach that 360% that you need to take everyone, not only from the top to the bottom, but also business. And we have psychologists there to not only look at the problem and how to manage the communication messages. And unfortunately, Poland is not immune. Polish people are not immunized on Russian disinformation. And sometimes I'm joking that Polish people knows everything about medicine, sport, and Russia. I think we have experience of Russia, and somehow we are not affected to like pro-Russian messages. But unfortunately, that I'm kind of feeling that and being too proud that we Russians will not do anything on our soil. Unfortunately, the results of the survey showed here we are actually not only affected by the Russian disinformation. For example, 13.8% of Poles thinks that the European Union is they captured Polish government and all the sovereignty, which is quite high from my perspective. However, at the same time, we are affected by on the disinformation from energy, climate, health care, and politics, and etc. Still, there is a high support to Ukraine, but it's also decreasing. I look at this process also from the perspective of how Russia is spreading disinformation, but it's not only. I think still we need to manage how to give a proper messages to our audience, to our societies, either to Baltics and to Poland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Legucka. Our next speaker is Sarah Oates. Sarah Oates is a professor and associate dean for research at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, University of Maryland, College Park in the US. Her scholarship is in the field of political communication and democratization, and a major theme in her work is the way in which media can support and subvert democracy in diverse places such as Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Her most recent book is Seeing Red, Russian Propaganda and American News, which was published last year. The title of Dr. Oates' presentation today is From Moscow to Mar-a-Lago, the role of Trump in amplifying and creating Russian propaganda.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this fantastic conference. I had to change my title a little bit. I was updating my slides daily. Thank you, Mr. Trump. If you don't know it, Mar-a-Lago is the Florida home of Trump. So the title was written during the campaign, so before Trump was elected. 2024 was the most critical U.S. election for Russia, I used to always say, because, obviously if Trump was going to be elected, he was not going to be as supportive of Ukraine. We were pretty sure about that. He's definitely proved me right on that one. However, as it turns out, it wound up being a lot more than my original question. My original question was, are Trump and Putin using the same authoritarian playbook? And in this context, I wondered what that meant for Ukraine specifically, but also, obviously, for democracy kind of in general. But at the time, I was much more concerned about international affairs. And does that mean that Trump will amplify Putin's messages, which is, quite problematic? So I'm going to say no to both those questions, right? So a no to, are they using the same authoritarian playbook? Because I don't think they are. And I think that matters, and I think that's helpful to us when we think about Ukraine and support for Ukraine. And will Trump always amplify Putin's messages? And again, well, he certainly did this week, so again, thank you, Mr. Trump. I don't think he always does. However, I don't think my questions, and you won't hear scholars say this a lot, I don't think my questions matter that much right now, because what we have is Trump is destroying American democracy from within. It got very confusing for a lot of us in the past few weeks about how do we talk about the role of Russia in this, and how do we talk about international affairs. And I'm going to do my best here to try to help us to figure out a way to decode where the differences lie between Putin and Trump and what the future may bring based on how we see Trump acting right now. Obviously, Vladimir Putin has a very clear set of messages that align to goals. I loved the presentation this morning that talked about collage, because I think that's a great way to think about it. Viewed separately, a lot of Putin's messages may not seem to coalesce into a particular strategy or worldview, and it's particularly confusing when they're false, when they're obviously not based in reality, like there are Nazis in Ukraine running the government. But they coalesce into a set of narratives about his expectations in the world, right? His strategic narrative about where Russia should be in the world. Speakers have talked about the fact that, yes, Telegram channels run by the Russian government changed right before the invasion of Ukraine. In some ways, we see signals in Russian political communication, and we understand and interpret those signals. We may not always like the signals we see. We may find many of them to be frustrating and disinformation, but they have a certain internal logic. A student of mine kind of inspired this. He's kind of like generative AI. Like, you kind of hear stuff with a lot of words in it, but it doesn't make any sense. And much like generative AI, on any given day, you might get a different answer. This is a constitutional crisis. I attended the rally strictly for scientific purposes on Monday at the Capitol. So this is an actual person holding up a sign on Monday. He's actually, interestingly, I happen to know him. He's a constitutional scholar. Was not his sign. He took it off of someone and held it up. So we're dealing with the fact that Trump has decided not to follow the American Constitution and not to abide by the rule of law. So that makes our calculation with Ukraine somewhat harder. Now, back in the innocent days of the campaign, this was a study, it's somewhat impressionistic, but it's this notion of, okay, where do Putin and Trump converge in their messaging, right? So, in the election narrative, which again, a little bit like generative AI, we weren't always, he wasn't 100% consistent, but you could mine out certain messages, a collage, as it were, of Trump. America first, stop sending money abroad, Trump is a great leader. Again, isolationists, they do repeat a bit. And then he has been quite supportive of Putin and Russia, at least in stump speeches, not always in policy, right? Because, he's around when there are sanctions and things like that. So the Putin narrative is, probably we all know it pretty well. The West is out to destroy Russia. Ukraine has no right to exist. Again, the West does. So we're looking at the convergences, right, in the middle. Both Putin and Trump, up until quite recently, were critical of NATO, but in slightly different ways. Trump was more, it's a waste of money, and Putin was always, existential threat. Where they converge in the central column is there should be a peace treaty in Ukraine in which Ukraine gives up territory. Trump's always been pretty consistent about that. And that predicts, of course, his behavior recently. Although his behavior recently has, again, been like generative AI. It's not made a lot of sense. So what kind of signals are we getting from last week? Always fun to be more of a newscaster than a political scientist. We know that Trump and Vance are willing to ally with Russia rather than EU traditional allies. That is a shocking sentence, but I think let's just call it what it is, what the signals are. Trump and Vance have fulfilled the wildest dreams of Russian propagandists, particularly by destroying USAID. Some people say USAID, some people say USAID. I have no idea. I know there's been like some long-term deep state disinformation theory about USAID. But that one seemed vindictive and personal on a level that's going to take a little bit more study. So that was completely dismantled. You might have seen it coming when the Global Engagement Center was not funded in December in the final budget rounds. So it might have been a little bit of a warning there. But GEC was never popular, really, with either party. So that's hard to say. Bigger picture is Trump's administration attacks on democracy itself. And the logical outcome is that Ukraine no longer benefits from American support, despite, and I think it's important to say this in this context, particularly very broad base of support for Ukraine within the United States. So that's frustrating and puzzling. I think Americans are relatively well informed about Ukraine. I think there's a lot of sympathy and knowledge that wasn't there before 2022. And there were a lot of Ukraine signs. This is another sign from Monday. A lot of Ukrainian flags. People definitely, and this was said by a former speaker, definitely understanding that the fight in Ukraine is a fight for democracy writ large. So why is Trump doing this, right? The eternal question, right? Why choose to do this? And this is me coming up with some reasons based on my knowledge of Trump, American politics, the history. So part of this is to annoy Democrats. So Trump's leadership style is to attack the opposition in a way that is not standard in American politics, which we've seen, ever since his first administration. So Democrats are broadly supportive of Ukraine, not supportive of Russia. In fact, Trump often uses the term Russophobia, which is a term straight out of RT/Sputnik, that this notion that somehow Russia is unfairly labeled as a threat, and it's not fair. Maybe it's a rejection of democracy as a method of governance, as an ideal. And we're seeing a lot of that from the Trump administration right now, that they're not interested in democracy. Maybe he really loves Russia. Now, the most common question I get when I go to talk about Trump is, do the Russians have the tape? And I'm like, first of all, I don't study sex tapes, although I think I might be more popular if I did. But no, I have no idea if the Russians have dirt on Trump. And I think that tends to be a little bit beside the point, because if they did, I think he'd put it on Truth Social or monetize it. I don't think he's a guy who's worried about that. I do find it, and this is a puzzle, and if anyone has an answer for this in the Q&A, I'd be really curious. I don't know why they published semi-nude pictures of Melania after Trump was elected. I can kind of get that, they're punking him a little bit, but I don't really know if there was some kind of messaging going on there. No idea. All right, so we'll skip over the notion that they have blackmail on him. So deep well of ignorance, I think that's a pretty promising one. You have no advisors, and you have no interest in learning why you do not want to trust Russia. Just Google 1945, right? It's not hard. Just enjoying the sense of chaos, because he's inculcating a lot of chaos right now in American society in order to really break down people so that they no longer feel they can be citizens but must become subjects. So there's a lot of that going on. As someone who studies Russian propaganda, I would love to say, I think it was the great propaganda. I really don't think it was. I don't think it was. I don't have a lot of answers for why the Trump administration is pursuing its particular foreign policy with Russia the way it is. But I don't think it was because someone subscribed to RT. Now, that being said, my book, which of course I will feature in a future slide, does talk about the resonance between a lot of what Russia says and a lot of what right-wing Americans say, right? Well, not right-wing Americans, right-wing media, because that's what I study. That aside, let's ask ourselves, how much Trump and Putin are using the same authoritarian playbook? I asked generative AI what an authoritarian playbook was. It didn't really have a very good answer. But I did put together this list from various sources. And you can see them for yourselves. These are all the things, if I were teaching a class to you on how to suppress a society, I would control the media, suppress opposition, manipulate the political process. It's good if you have a cult of personality. And I'll speak in a minute about who has the better cult of personality, Putin or Trump. Control the economy, which is a tough one, particularly in the United States. And then there's nationalism, surveillance, right? So, okay, here's the scoreboard. I'm a kind of a college basketball fan, so I like scoreboards. And we've talked a lot about the first one. There is no truth. I really wondered in 2016 why Trump was fighting with the media about the fact that it was reported his inauguration crowds were smaller than those of Obama. Well, okay, I know why he might care, but it was really, it was obvious. You just look at the pictures, there happened to be fewer people there. Okay, you could say it was a colder day, whatever. But I realize now that he was establishing a pattern, whether consciously or unconsciously, to decouple his actions from any need to have evidence or truth connected with them. Putin has been successful with this, although I would also argue that Putin has a better, clear strategic narrative. That I think if you talk to Russians about their hopes and aspirations for their country, Velika Россия, Rodina, Отчество, they would know a way of thinking and speaking about their aspirations that resonated with their past in a glorious way, right? Americans don't have that with Trump, I would argue. I think people who support Trump and like Trump, the deepest supporters, the most serious supporters, they do feel that. They do feel that emotion. I have a colleague who spent the summer going to Trump rallies and, and engaging with people and talking to people. And she said what was really interesting about them was, in general, they were very happy to talk. They were delighted to speak with her about their love for Trump. And they would talk to her about how he made them feel and how they felt proud again. But I don't think he's managed to articulate a vision or dream for the country in the way that I think Putin has for Russia. So I think that's interesting. Currently, reject domestic rule of law. Putin has done that over time. Trump is currently doing that. Great leader myth achieved. Those people who support Trump really, really support him, but they're not the majority of the American population. Teasing out how many Americans are deep and true believers of Trump is difficult. It's not the 75 million people who voted for him, right? He won. And that's a whole different presentation, right? He has a negative approval rating right now. Putin does not. Okay, sure, those are surveys, with approval in authoritarian states are difficult, but still, as much as American scholars might wish Putin to be unpopular, I don't think that's true. So he's not achieved that kind of dominance. Putin will say quite clearly that democracy doesn't work. That's not a model or a worldview that he thinks would be appropriate for Russia or really anyone. And I would argue that Trump has also rejected democracy. And you could see that throughout his first term, but you can definitely see it in this term as well. So I had to take the nerd moment, right? So what am I talking about when I'm talking about strategic narrative? And this is this notion of a coherent system of interrelated and sequentially organized stories that share a common rhetorical desire. And it establishes to resolve a conflict. You don't have to resolve a conflict per se, but you should establish audience expectations. A better word is a collage. Like a set of ideas and aspirations that form a myth. I wouldn't know standing in front of you what the Canadian strategic narrative is. You could probably all think about these different parts that make up, how one perceives oneself as Canadian and how that, might play into the future. And I think Americans used to have a kind of useful myth that America was the shining beacon on the hill, that America was where democracy worked, and America had thrown off British dominance and became this wonderful melting pot that welcomed immigrants from around the world and built this new society. And that's kind of vague and fuzzy in some ways. That was what I grew up being taught. But I think that has shifted, but we haven't found a new one. And I don't think Trump's found a new one. And even more worryingly, if you don't support Trump, I definitely don't think the Democratic Party's found a new one. So I would say right now we're a country in a search of a narrative. So these are the Russian strategic narratives. A former speaker did a better job with this, so maybe we should go with those. These are getting a little outdated. I think it would be better if I had engaged a little bit more recently, but they still work. Still the four biggies. I mined these out of Putin's speeches a couple of years ago, and some other things. As much as I can figure it out, I would say these are the relevant Trump strategic narratives. He's moved from being isolationist to actually signaling that he wants to join with Russia. And the same ones, let's stop spending money abroad, or I said sending, but spending. He is a great leader, and he has this support for authoritarian leaders. The one in red is the one that is newer and the one that I find most perhaps different and I want to say challenging or frightening. The notion that democracy is over, right? That he's not interested in democracy anymore. That's the end of really what I wanted to say today. If you'd like to read my book, I talk a lot about how this all happened. You can download a free chapter. It's media-politics.com or just email me. I wasn't clever enough to put up a URL code. The final thing I just wanted to point out, and we've all kind of struggled with this today, right? Like, how do you make sense when you're being just flooded and inundated with disinformation? And most of what's coming out of the White House right now is disinformation. 11 of the 12 points they made on USAID were factually inaccurate. So how do you deal with flooding the zone at this very, very critical moment of supporting democracy in Ukraine, which supports democracy worldwide? What do we make of this? So I'll end on that.
Thank you, Dr. Oates. We are opening the floor for questions.
Just want to share an explanation that Valérie Pécard expressed 2 days ago in a very long post. I'll try to express it, although it may oversimplify, and to get your reaction to that in terms of the question, why is Trump doing what he is? And he speculates that Trump is more worried about China than he is worried about Russia. And he wants to drive a wedge between Russia and China. Ukraine is a very inconvenient fact for doing so. And he therefore would like to open up to Russia so that they do not join or bolster or make China stronger in its competition with the United States. What do you think?
I think that's one of the most rational things I've heard. That's definitely a possibility. I would love to think that Trump is rational, that there's a plan here. I just don't think there is.
We were trying to get also the logic of it, but at the same time, from our perspective, there is also other logic in other way of action, probable, and from our perspective, much more successful and effective. That if we assume, and we know that because Americans were talking about China for years, this is not the new thing, that China is on the top of the priority. However, at the same time, China is much more complex threat for the freedom world, free world, like assuming that we are calling this group of people like democracies. Because Russia is aggressor, is a threat for the global order, but at the most important threat for the Ukrainians. But we need to look at the bigger picture. But actually, it has two leverage, the most important. The aggressive actions, military aggressive action, including the threat of the nuclear power, and the energy. That was the main leverage that Russia has. But when you look at the China, you will see much more complex leverage on US, Canada, Europe, and others. So we were thinking in the very logical way to whom we should first, or we have much more leverage to show to China through Russia. Because if we stop Russia in Ukraine and in the global scale, China will not act to us in much more complex way, to which decoupling, which will be not possible in the short term. And we in Europe, we decrease our energy dependence from Russia, but we are struggling with what Russia is good in from the Soviet time, with the psychological operations. And this is something that Russia is using, and also is using the peace propaganda, and we can talk about it. But exactly, if we want to challenge China, and we need to go it from Russia, not through European Union or Canada to affect allies. Thanks.
So we have a question online, and it's for Ms. Legucka. The question is from Vic. Does the existence of relatively large ethnic Russian populations in Latvia and Estonia pose special challenges for countering Russian information/influence strategies?
I think I answered that question in my presentation. If not, maybe I will clear it up. That it is sometimes challenge from the overview or only part of those Russian minorities, if we can call them as a minority, is a challenge for those countries, because the majority of them still believe that they need to defend the internal integrity of those countries. So it's much more complex group of people, not only those who are Russia would call it fifth column in the Baltic states. Their reactions is different to Russian invasion, but some of them, yes, they are challenging for those countries. Thanks.
I have the question for Dr. Legucka and Dr. Oates. For Dr. Legucka, what is the role in Russian disinformation on amplifying the historical tensions between Poland and Ukraine so that people get distracted and do not focus on the history centennial of our partnerships? What is the role, and how do we counter that both on the state level and on the day-to-day interaction and education piece? And for Dr. Oates, my question is, well, we've talked about Trump, and we all know that we have to respect democracy and work with no matter who is the elected leader. But where do we draw this line? When do we lose hope for partnerships between US and Ukraine? Because we're not at the point yet. The United States are a big supporter, and we need to be able to find the workarounds to still get aid for Ukraine, but at which point do we draw the line? Thank you.
Maybe my answer would be simple, but it is not this simple answer. I would say that we need to resolve our historical issues between ourselves. That will not be an instrument of dividing us and showing each part of this argument as a better or worse or disrespectful and etc. Now we have the question which raised recently on exhumation. I know that there is a process between Polish and Ukrainian, not only historians, because I'm not on the position that we need to leave history behind because we have much more urgent questions, because all the time that we did that, because the historical issues between Polish and Ukrainian societies are very long. And since 90s, I was also present in many conferences, and that kind of panels were like, sitcom or tragic sitcom, or it was very difficult to observe. Thinking that we can leave history to historians will not work, because all the time that came up with the different things, what was something going on between Poland and Ukraine, or Russia were using it. I'm not saying that only Russia, but internal groups of politics are using that kind of things, and then it's fueled by Russia, etc., because Russia all over the world, they are not inventing problems, they are fueling problems that we have in our societies. So that's why we need to resolve it first. And exhumation, I hope that it will work on the proper way, because this is something that Poles do not understand why there is no answer for. And on the other side, also Ukrainians does not understand anything, lots of things that we are doing. So resolving the problems is the first thing between ourselves, not to be, divided from outside.
Students always ask the best questions, and that's a great question. So where to draw the line? I think that's going to be a difficult question for Zelensky and his administration moving forward. The good news is, Trump might change his mind tomorrow. And as my slide suggested, he may just be punking us. I don't think he really knows I know he doesn't know what he's doing, and I feel very confident saying that when it comes to negotiating with Russia. Reference Yalta. Americans in general maybe don't know what they're doing, but particularly Trump. I think you draw the line when Ukraine makes a decision about the horrific human cost of the war, and when you're willing to say, this compromise works. The problem is any treaty they make with Russia won't be honored. So it's just a little bit of a catch-22. There's still a lot of impetus for Ukraine to keep fighting. But saying that, would I send my son to the front tomorrow? It's a very difficult thing. I actually sat next to two Canadians talking about how they were worried their sons would have to go into the military if America attacked. And I thought, you know, that's not a conversation I've ever overheard in a Nando's. So yeah, he says a lot of stuff, right? Is America going to attack Canada? No, I feel confident on that one.
My question will be how all of us and every of us can contribute to stopping sharing this anti-Ukrainian legitimization of these absolutely illegal narratives of Russian regime here, especially in Canada, in such a vulnerable media ecosystem that is very dependent on the US narrative. We have here a lot of esteemed professors, NGOs, probably someone from government is here, I really hope. What can we do to defend our narratives basically here?
You know, just sitting here today, someone made a comment, you know, they don't want to hear what we want to say, right? They're not hearing us when we say, no, Russia's the aggressor, no, NATO did not cause the invasion of Ukraine. The social scientists need to figure out better ways to build bridges and communicate with people who are believing the disinformation. I think we need to stop worrying about probably anyone in this room who can understand and process and has that ability, right? But we've got to find some way in my country to get to people who are believing this narrative because it's very, very dangerous, or any of the other narratives that are being pushed by the Trump administration, which are patently untrue. As an academic, I think that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to stop kind of complaining and documenting, and I'm going to start trying to think about what are the levers we can push to reach those people who are most affected.
Question on fighting disinformation in a democracy. You used the example of strong anti-vax messages from Russian propaganda in the States, but yet those are also messages from legitimate American politicians.
Like our Secretary of Health, yeah.
The one with the worm in his, yeah, exactly. So how do we do that without being accused of interfering in the legitimate political process? And without actually doing so.
In freedom of speech, I still believe in even saying stupid things that we can say and hear, right? The countries which are having societies with the critical thinking are those who are reading the most. The best example is Finland and Sweden. And the critical thinking is the weapon that we can defend ourselves. That kind of things are building our resilience to messages from even politicians that are affecting our debate. But I still believe that we do not have right to say or like exclude that kind of politicians. It's the right of people to immunity to that kind of activities and to be wise enough to vote differently.
But briefly, I think we're in what we would call a Kuhnian paradigm shift. For example, people believe the Earth went around the sun. Other way, the sun went around the Earth. Sorry, I'm obviously buying the disinformation. And then eventually there became evidence, and people, you know, really fought against it, and there was the Inquisition and all that. And then people realized, oh, it really is this way. Our revolution is we have to stop the well-meaning studies of, oh, we need more critical thinking, we need to teach analytical skills to kindergartners, and that's all great, that's fantastic. But we're in a crisis moment. We need to figure out how to get to the people who are being affected by disinformation and acting on it. And that's going to take a different skill set, I would say, and different tool set.
My question relates to U.S. or Trump's antipathy to the EU, particularly with respect to Musk now being around. Whether some of this might relate to success of EU regulators with respect to tech giants, which are American companies. It also not only highlights the fact that the EU is actually successfully trying to regulate them. EU has not produced its own giants that the US has failed to regulate. So I just wondered to what extent you think that dynamic holds.
Well, to be fair to Trump, I think he's hated the EU even in his first administration before Musk was, you know, sort of part of his administration. I think the root of it lies in a lot of what you said, right? That the EU is successful at regulating business in a way that Trump wouldn't approve of. But I think it's more that you're always the most jealous of the friend who is most like you, right? So the EU is a powerful economic and democratic bloc. And that's why I think he's very antagonistic to the EU, because they are the democratic competitors to the United States, basically, in his view, which is ridiculous. So instead of thinking them as allies, I swore to myself I wouldn't say ridiculous, but I just did, so whatever. I also apparently don't know whether the Earth revolves around the sun or the sun around the Earth, so that's fine too. So that's all I could say, really, because I haven't studied it, but I agree with you. It's bizarre and not helpful, but...
I have no idea to answer that particular question, why Trump is affecting European Union, but I would say that European Union is the not only democratic but and social and economic power, but definitely regulatory power. Find the problem, we regulate that, or we make institutions or something like this. And it's competitive, right? Because one of the elements of fighting with hate speech and the platforms and how to protect our societies is newly managed the DSA, which is Digital Service Act. The regulatory that countries are now implementing to each country that regulates platforms. And this is something that Musk or other platforms have to pay amounts of money for, like, crossing those regulations. And this is a thing that if we will be standing strong to implement a Digital Service Act, that will be block or affect the business that Musk is having. So dividing Europe is making him much more powerful and profitable. Profitable.
This question is for Dr. Legucka. In the US, social media companies are exempt from the liabilities that other media companies are subject to. This is under Section 230 of the Communications Act, and because these social media platforms are considered perpetrators of third-party content. In your experience, is this best practice in governance, or should social media companies be held liable for the content they facilitate?
Great question. So this is from 1996, this law, so it's almost 30 years old now. No, the law doesn't work. The law was made at a time when there really wasn't social media, and the intentions were that the internet worked kind of like the cables that bring you, TV, that it was just a platform, right? And we know that not to be true. So Section 230 is not at all fit for purpose. Unfortunately, I don't think we're in a space where we're going to see like good, rational legislation. And there has been debate. The debate has focused on the same things we talked about in Ukraine, right? Like, where does regulation of social media fall into censorship? But it doesn't work. It's caused a lot of harm. It's not good legislation for the modern world, and it would be great if it could change. Are we in an era of American governance where we're going to see great, rational internet governance? I don't think so.
You mentioned about Trump presenting no clear vision. Doesn't he do that to the American people when he's talking about the golden age, which sounds like an era of no income tax, government living off duties and tariffs, but the overall message, which is something that's been pounded, especially by the Republican side, is no government in your life and no involvement. And that seems to, however it's done, resonate. I would think that's his underlying vision.
I'm going to go back and make my Trump collage, I think, on the wall of my office, and I think that's a part of it. But the problem is, how long can you sustain that? When the local hospital Medicare facility shuts down and there's no Medicaid payment and there's no disability payment. It's funny because, people have this view of Americans as being, that's there's not a lot of state. The state is everywhere in your life in the United States. Something, I think it's like a third of the population rely on the government for medical care, which is not particularly well known. And this is a weird statement. I just find Putin's strategic narratives a little bit more based in reality than Trump's, and that is a terrifying statement. I think you have a good point. Maybe I'm not looking hard enough. Maybe because I'm not in the mind of the Trump voter, I'm not seeing it. So I need to try a little harder because it might be out there, and if I could figure it out, it'd be helpful.
Because I'm not maybe fully agree with you in the sense that Putin is much more like connected with the reality. The matter is time. Putin is repeating all the things for a long, long time. The messages are contradictory, but when you elaborate how the narratives are built, like you have like meta narratives, which is that Russia is an exceptional country, and etc. No one can understand Russia, and then you go deep down with the narratives. And then you go to the messages. And messages can contradict to each other. It doesn't matter. So it makes this very big clash. But now when it comes to Trump, I think we are in the process of creating that narrative, strategic narrative. So that's why maybe we much more confused about his strategic narratives, because it's in making. We can see it yet.
The point you make, and it's a great point, is I think his supporters can see it. I don't think me, or feel it, which is even better. So I think that's my next paper. So I can give you a footnote if you give me your name later. I do get the MAGA newsletter every day, which is, every week. It's a scrape of Truth Social that's then run through ChatGPT to summarize. And that's, and anyone can subscribe. It's free. You can come ask me later how to get it. Yeah, so it's pretty eye-opening.
Time, yeah. Dr. Legucka, Dr. Oates, thank you for a really wonderful presentation and for discussion.